you need me to? Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Hello, hello. Testing 1, 2, 3. Do I sing a song? La 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 la. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Derek, do you still need me to go? Okay, thanks. I know. It's a little bit more dreary, but you know, at least this time I will probably avoid maybe like almost feeling like I went into December. No, exactly. I think I got a little bit of warm last week. Well, there was just a moment where we started getting to last season, and I was like, oh, geez, my arms are fried. And I was like taking the sign, and I was trying to. Yep. Great, it's good to see you.
Oh, we definitely need to take this up.
E-tape?
Yeah, it's gonna blow over.
Okay. Where?
Derek has it. So move it in close, but then also
Check, 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 check. And then all I do is just. Okay. We have check, 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 check. Are you good? You getting that? All right. All right. I think we're good.
Actually, oh no, we don't have the.
Oh yeah, you wanna do that?
Yeah, I think got it. But then we just need tape on the top.
Checking, checking. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Derek? Should I say something else? I can hear the speakers.
Okay. I think this is gonna work though. One more thing here.
No? You're not getting any feedback?
No, it didn't work.
Actually, I would wrap it a little bit of do.
Wrap it around. Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, wrap it around.
Good idea. Do you have to run a show?
Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check.
All right, good morning. I'm New York City Comptroller Brad Lander, and I'm here this morning to release a report whose title, unfortunately, speaks entirely for itself. Evictions up, representation down. At a time of skyrocketing rents, the Adams administration is failing utterly to provide legal representation to low-income tenants facing eviction who have a right to counsel under New York City law that the Adams administration is entirely failing to meet. This right to counsel is one of the laws that I was proudest to co-sponsor when I was a city council member. You know, for years before I was a city council member, I worked as a tenant advocate and a housing organizer. I worked at the Fifth Avenue Committee in Brooklyn, and I would go with tenants to housing court. And at that time, all the landlords had lawyers, and almost none of the tenants had lawyers. And so time and time again, tenants would wind up facing eviction because they didn't have a lawyer representing them. So it might be that the landlord's lawyer would basically say, look, here's the deal. You haven't paid your rent. Sign this piece of paper and you can avoid, having the marshal come. We'll give you, an extra month to get out. Or it might have been that that landlord attorney brought a stipulation and said, look, this is it. And set the tenant up to sign a stipulation they weren't going to be able to meet. And then a few months later, they wound up getting evicted over and over and over again. We saw, and unfortunately continue to see, unrepresented tenants are dramatically more likely to be evicted in housing court. And that's why right to counsel was such a powerful idea. We have a right to counsel in criminal court. People even think of that. We're near the law and order filming areas. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be appointed to represent you. So if you're in criminal court, you've got a right to an attorney. But if you're a low-income tenant facing eviction from your home, and you're going to wind up on the street before right to counsel in New York City, you did not have any such right. And that's why tons of people faced eviction. So that right to counsel legislation was an amazing new opportunity for New York City to prevent low-income families from being evicted into homelessness time and time again. And I want to give credit here to then council members, now borough presidents, Vanessa Gibson and Mark Levine, who were the prime sponsors of the legislation that said, in New York City, we're going to have a right to counsel. if you're a low-income tenant, anything up to 200% of poverty, and you're facing eviction in housing court, we're going to make sure you have an attorney. And that was an incredible piece of legislation. And after it was implemented and before Eric Adams was elected, the rates rose and rose and rose till they got up to almost 3/4 of tenants having representation. And the data is so powerful about how much it works. 89% of tenants, 89% of low-income tenants, good morning. 89% of low-income tenants who are facing eviction in housing court who have a lawyer, they don't get evicted. They're able to stay in their homes. And that's because that lawyer can help them negotiate a fair and good stipulation. That's because that lawyer knows how to help them get a one-shot deal. That's because the lawyer knows the rights that tenants have. And so 90% of the time, tenants are able to stay in their homes. Unfortunately, that was all before the pandemic and the election of Eric Adams, because once the pandemic hit, there was an eviction moratorium, which kept evictions down for the pandemic. But since the pandemic has led to a skyrocketing 440% increase in eviction filings since the pandemic. And of course, every one of those tenants who faced an eviction filing since 2021 deserved a lawyer under New York City's right to counsel. And so what we've done in the Comptroller's office, I want to give props to Celeste Hornbach, our senior housing specialist who did this work, was just take a look at how are we doing at meeting the obligations of right to counsel. How is the Adams administration doing? And unfortunately, the Adams administration is utterly failing to provide representation to low-income tenants facing eviction in housing court as required by the law, and the numbers are in black and white in this report. Legal representation in housing court has dropped dramatically from 71% in 2021 to just 42% citywide last year. Fewer than half of tenants, fewer than half of low-income tenants facing eviction get that lawyer in housing court. And let's talk about how bad it is in the Bronx especially. And this was one thing that really stuck out to me in this report, because the Bronx has by far the most concentrated rates of eviction. And this is actually much worse than it was before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, it was pretty bad. 7 out of the 10 top neighborhoods for eviction filing rates were in the Bronx. As of last year, all 10 of the top 10 community districts for eviction filing rates are in the Bronx. That's not a 10 out of 10 that anybody wants. And Bronx families in particular, hardworking, low-income families struggling to pay the rent, even as the rents in the Bronx rise past what they can afford, are facing eviction rates dramatically higher than anywhere else in the city. So what you might have imagined the mayor would do is say, wow, in this city of working class people with the Bronx facing eviction rates, let's make sure that those Bronx neighborhoods at least have the highest rate of representation of lawyers in housing court. But unfortunately, we have done exactly the opposite. Or let me be clearer, Eric Adams has done exactly the opposite. The representation rates in the Bronx did get higher in the previous administration. They were up to 81%. 8 out of 10 Bronx low-income tenants facing eviction had a lawyer in housing court. And remember, that'll translate to 9 out of 10 of them avoiding eviction. The rate last year for the Bronx was 31%. Fewer than 1 in 3 of low-income tenants in the Bronx facing eviction. In the 10 out of 10 neighborhoods in the city with the highest rate of evictions, fewer than 1 in 3 have the lawyers that they're entitled to under right to counsel. And as a result, evictions have spiked dramatically. Nearly 34,000 families have been evicted from the start of 2021, from the start of 2022 until the end of 2024. That's the Adams administration record. Is more evictions, is more homeless families. And stunningly, the mayor seems to be looking to take the numbers even higher. 2 decisions that he and his appointees have made just in the past 2 days will further ratchet up eviction rates. He's now announced plans to change city FEPS. Let's remember, city FEPS is also for low-income families who qualify for a voucher. If you stay in that program, you're going to wind up, if Eric Adams has his way, having your share of the rent increased from 30% to 40%. So if you're making minimum wage, that means you make $34,000 a year. Right now, your rent is capped at $10,000 a year, so you've got $24,000 to try to cover childcare and food and transit. It's just barely enough to skate by, but we did the math, and like you can just barely skate by. If your rent goes up to 40% of your income, that's going to be $14,000, $4,000 more, and that's it. You will not be able, so many families will not be able to either pay for childcare and then they'll lose their jobs, or they won't be able to pay their share of the rent, and they'll be in housing court where only 1 in 3 of them will have a lawyer that the city promised them. And then also this week, Eric Adams' appointees on the Rent Guidelines Board indicated that they might support 2-year rent increases up to 7.75%, since the average rent stabilized rent is about $1,500. That could be $100 more a month, folks. Are paying. So somehow yesterday the mayor called it the best budget ever, but what we have is the worst housing crisis ever. Evictions rising, representation falling, rents going up, more families being evicted, more families are going to wind up homeless. This is a crisis, and we need to focus on fixing it. So what we've also put out in the report, Evictions Up, Representation Down, is a roadmap to fixing the right to counsel and getting to 100% representation of low-income tenants facing eviction in housing court. And the details are spelled out in here, restructuring the contracts with legal service providers, who you're going to hear from, so that they can recruit the attorneys that they need, bringing caseloads down so attorneys have a reasonable number of cases and can represent tenants, paying our nonprofit legal service providers on time instead of 10 months to a year late, making it difficult for them just to meet payroll, much less recruit new attorneys. And we outline an additional set of steps that the city can take to prevent evictions upstream, with a range of other strategies that keep people from even getting to the point where they need to have a lawyer as they're facing eviction in housing court. The one more point I want to make is about the role of New York State. So mostly I've talked here. Right to counsel, it was a law that I was proud to co-sponsor at the city council. It's a city law, and it's Eric Adams' obligation, which he is failing to meet, as we're seeing. But the state is also failing to play its role here, and I want to just take one step back, because when Andrew Cuomo was governor, at the beginning of his tenure, New York State covered about half the shelter costs for New York City shelter, 47%. So there was basically a 50-50 split for city shelter costs. But under Cuomo's tenure, he basically took back all the state's money and stiffed the city with the cost. So today, the state only pays 6% of shelter costs, which have gone up dramatically. That's a lot of the money we could be using to provide right to counsel that Andrew Cuomo took away from New York City, somewhat at the behest of his real estate donors, somewhat just in a pissing match with the mayors that he served with. And meanwhile, when New York City created this right to counsel, and when everyone saw what great benefits it has, that 90% of tenants avoid eviction, legislators in Albany said, this is great, we should take it statewide. There should be a statewide right to counsel, because obviously tenants in Buffalo or Rochester or Syracuse or on Long Island also need a lawyer when they're in housing court, and municipalities need partnership from the state. If there was a statewide right to counsel, it could provide that the state would pay half the cost. And if New York State would pick up half the cost for shelter and half the cost of right to counsel, then of course we could dramatically increase the resources and get the representation rates back up to where they're supposed to be, and provide lawyers to every tenant in housing court. And remember, every single time, we're talking about a family that's been in that home for a while, and if they don't have that lawyer, is dramatically more likely to be evicted. Those are kids who are going to have a hard time staying in school. That's a trauma when you get evicted. Shelter is not a place that families want to be. It's hard to get out. The length of time people are in keeps going up and up and up. And of course, it has a dramatic cost for the city itself, because the cost of shelter dramatically outpaces what it would have cost us to pay for the lawyers to keep those families in their homes. So That is what is outlined in Evictions Up, Representation Down, just how bad it's gotten under the Adams administration, just how badly the state is failing to provide its share. And I guess I'll just make the note for people today because it's new news we just saw this morning. But the governor, Andrew Cuomo, who executed those cuts, is now running to be the mayor of New York City. And yesterday it was revealed that about a third of the donors to his super PAC are landlords, are real estate owners. So it's no one has to wonder whose side he's on. Andrew Cuomo is not on the side of tenants facing eviction. Andrew Cuomo is on the side of landlords looking to profit. So as New Yorkers are thinking about how are we going to keep families in their home, what's it going to take to solve the affordability crisis facing the city, it's worth remembering Andrew Cuomo's record and his current practices and calling on the city to get right on right to counsel so we can keep families in their homes. We're going to hear from a couple of people who are much more deeply in this system on an everyday basis than I am, and I'm grateful that a few of them are here. First, we're going to hear from Pavita Krishnaswamy, who is a legal aid attorney and someone that has been in the legal services and housing court systems for 2 decades with a lot of experience at what it takes to keep tenants in their homes. Pavita, thank you very much for being here this morning.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Comptroller Lander, for giving us an opportunity to speak today. My name is Pavita Krishnaswamy, and I am with the Legal Aid Society. We are the largest provider of civil legal services and criminal legal services, criminal defense services in the country. And I just want to amplify a couple things that the Comptroller mentioned, starting with the fact that eviction is a trauma that rips at the fabric of not just the household that is affected by the eviction, but the community in which that household lived. In my experience, these are folks who have been in these communities for decades. They have anchored these communities through enormous change, through gentrification, through demographic change. They are the backbone of the communities that they are then ripped from through the process of eviction. As the Comptroller said, without an attorney, the odds of a tenant prevailing in housing court are very, very slim. And there's a reason for that. Housing law is complicated. It is immensely complex. And most tenants do not know the defenses to which they are entitled, that they can raise in their eviction proceedings. And in the absence of a lawyer, they are unlikely to raise those defenses. But when they raise those defenses, they are very likely to prevail, to buy themselves time, to stay in their house, to pay off debts that they may owe, and remain in the community. You're going to hear more about this from some fierce tenants who will speak directly after me. But let's be clear that at this point, the right to counsel has become an unfunded mandate. Our attorneys are deeply passionate about this issue. They fight every day to keep people housed across 5 boroughs. They go to court, they do the best that they can. But as long as we underfund or defund this program, it is going to become increasingly difficult for legal services and legal aid providers to retain these talented attorneys. So we call on the city. 4 out of 10 is not an acceptable number. Every low and moderate income tenant who is facing eviction is entitled to an attorney, and we call on the city to fund this program appropriately and in a timely fashion. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to our client, Timothy Paulson. Thank you.
Hello. Welcome. You've heard the politics and you've heard the statistics about what it is to be evicted, how many people. Hi. You've heard the politics and the statistics behind eviction and behind the issue of having counsel. I'm just going to tell you what it feels like to be evicted On the coldest day of the year, I was evicted January 23rd of this year, and thrown out on the street by a city marshal who burst into my kitchen using a WD-40 and a credit card, announcing that it was no longer my place; it was his place. He owned it, and it was something out of a movie. I told him I was sick with norovirus. I wasn't going anywhere. He didn't care. He said he'd call an ambulance. I called his bluff. He did call an ambulance. He called the cops. When I told him I wasn't going, and the whole thing was a tangle. I had a case before the city. I did have an arrears. I did, but the case was supposed to prevent this from happening. Long story short, the cops backed him up. I had no choice. I had to leave. He threatened my cats. I threatened him. No one objected to what I said, which was really vile, but I had to leave. I had to just grab a few things and leave my apartment of 37 years and go out into the frosty cold. I went straight to Carlina Rivera's office, where I'd been fighting this case for 2 years. And while I was there, they started taking all my belongings out of my apartment, putting them in a van where they drove everything that I owned, all my belongings, except for the cats, to the Bronx, where I would not be able to even look at them except for paying a fee of $800. So there I was. I went to the court. I tried to get the right to even go into my apartment. The judge did give me the right to get my cats out. He gave a quick writ, but I had no attorney. I went down to room 102 at the housing court right here, and there was a handwritten sign that said there will be no legal aid attorneys. There will be no representation. Free attorneys. So I had to face the judge and the landlord's attorney alone, which is terrifying, because these guys, they have backing, they have money, they have every reason to get me out. It's an East Village apartment that's worth arguably $3,000 to $4,000 a month, and I'm rent regulated. So they wanted me out, and they would do anything to get that place. And if it wasn't for legal aid coming to my aid, I would never have got back in, but I did get back in. And it was a 3-month fight. I not only got back in, but I won my case with the city, and they paid my back rent. And it was a substantial amount of back rent, and it was a substantial fight, and I've been fighting that fight for 2 years alone without any attorney. And they came to my aid on the final day. The elevators were out, and 3 legal aid attorneys came. There were 3 women, and they were going up and down the stairs from the 5th floor to the bottom to talk to HRA and browbeat them into finally signing this document that I've been trying to get them to sign for 2 years. And we won. We won the case. I got back in. And I'm here today to just say it is possible, and that's what an attorney can do, but also to tell you what it feels like not to have one, and to be on the outside. So it can happen. It is incredibly important, and what Brad was saying is absolutely true. Without one, in this city, against those forces, with lawyers who work 24/7 for $300 to $800 an hour, you're helpless. It doesn't matter how smart you are. You cannot beat that. You need to have an attorney on your side. So I just want to applaud the work they're doing.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing your story with us. It's not easy to do, but it's very powerful and important for people to hear what a real difference this makes in people's lives. And thank you, Pavita, to you and the attorneys who are working hard across the city every day to provide representation and who can keep folks like Tim in their homes. And if we don't do it, who will be losing their homes? Our final speaker is another tenant advocate. CUF, or Congregations United for Fair Housing, is an amazing tenants' rights organizing group that was part of helping win Right to Counsel and organizes tenants to make sure that they keep it. And we're very grateful to have Claudia Valdivia here to represent Churches United for Fair Housing. Thank you, Claudia.
Hola, mi nombre es Claudia Valdivia. Vivo actualmente en Sunset Park. Creo que es muy importante que haya más abogados porque siendo que nosotros las comunidades hispanas, negras, estamos siendo violentados por nuestros propios renteros. Yo actualmente llevaba viviendo en mi vivienda 10 años por querer reparos, por exigir simplemente tener una vivienda digna para mis 5 hijos. Llegué a la corte familiar, encontraron algunas veces plomo en mi niño. Actualmente mi niño está deshabilitado con primero de autismo y esto quedó impune. Todavía me desalojaron de mi vivienda. Creo que no es justo que los ciudadanos pagamos taxes, damos lo mejor, somos trabajadores, nunca debí ni una renta. Luché por ese hogar porque viví 9 años. En la pandemia mi esposo es deliberista, casi perdió su vida y no debía ni una renta. Yo no debía ni una renta y aún así tuve que ser desalojada. Actualmente estoy en un apartamento muy pequeño para mi familia. Mi niño necesita un espacio para jugar. Gracias a esta discapacidad por no tener los servicios y no preocuparse en revisar cómo están las viviendas, porque aparte de que nos cobran una renta, no nos las reparan. Venimos a nuestras autoridades a decir, a exigir nuestros derechos, porque todos merecemos tener derechos y tener un hogar digno para nuestros hijos. Vienen y nos desalojan. Entonces creo que es importante que haya más abogados para nuestra comunidad. Actualmente cuando yo tuve abogado, pues ya fue tarde porque mi abogada ya llegó cuando yo ya iba ya en la cuarta corte. Entonces creo que es importante que hagan de los fondos a nuestras comunidades y a los programas que realmente valen la pena. Porque esto va a seguir y va a haber más desalojos actualmente con los gobernadores que tenemos y con el actual presidente. Esto va a causar que varios renteros se aprovechen de estas ocasiones, querer sacar a los inquilinos que llevan más de 20, 30 años en sus domicilios. Creo que eso es un abuso. Han trabajado para este país como cualquiera de ustedes, hemos luchado por tener nuestros barrios, nosotros hemos forjado nuestros barrios porque hemos trabajado para que haya los servicios, para que haya más lugares verdes y ahora nos los quieren quitar. Creo que es ahora que nos oigan y nos escuchen, que den más fondos para el programa, para que tengan más representación legal. Gracias.
Gracias, muchísimas gracias.
Be translating for Claudia. Claudia lived in her own in her apartment for close to 10 years. She was living in an apartment with lead, which led to lead poisoning of her child. She has a child with autism. None of this matter. She was asked to sign an agreement on her first appointment in housing court. She did not have any representation, and what she signed was the eviction clause. So she eventually did get evicted from her apartment. She's living in very close quarters now. She's a tiny 1-bedroom, and she has 5 children. They have no access to green places like her former neighborhood. She has to take 2 buses to take her kids to schools, and their whole lives are disrupted by this. She was advocating for government officials to invest in the right to counsel and expand it. She's saying that they have fought for better neighborhoods, for more green spaces, but now they're being pushed out of these places that are being gentrified.
Muchísimas gracias for speaking today, Claudia, and we're so sorry for the situation, but it's such a stark example of the difference that right to counsel makes. And it's, Claudia makes this very important point that in so many of the situations we're talking about, it's not just an eviction filing, it's terrible conditions, it's the landlord who's failing to meet their legal obligations. But if tenants don't have a lawyer in court to make that case, then how can they exercise their rights? The landlord, let's be clear, always has a lawyer in housing court. It's a right to only right to counsel that gives tenants that lawyers. And so if we don't want more folks like Tim facing eviction, if we don't want more folks like Claudia stuck in apartments with lead and then tricked into signing their own eviction notices rather than being able to exercise their rights, we must get to universal tenant representation as required by law, which Eric Adams has utterly failed to do and which New York City owes to Tim and to Claudia and to all tenants. Thanks very much for being here this morning, and we'll be glad to take some questions.
We're going to take any on-topic questions. Topic? Either of you?
Because I believe in tenants being represented in housing courts so they don't get evicted. It's a pretty good reason, honestly. Go ahead. Yeah. So the data for each borough is in the report about representation, and you can see it by borough. The only borough where representation improved was Staten Island, actually. It declined in all other 4 of the 4 boroughs. You know, what I thought was interesting about the Bronx, I mean, again, you know, Bronx had the most concentrated evictions before, went up, you know, since the pandemic. We had reached 81% representation, and now it's down to 31% representation. I will point you to the place in the report where you can look at the representations by borough. Well, you can kind of go in and see. I think in Brooklyn it fell from 55% representation. It only got up to 55% and is now back down to 50. So basically kind of more or less where it is citywide, only half of tenants being represented in court. Okay.
Any other on-topic questions? Okay, any off-topic questions? Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, guys.